Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. This one is called The Colonization of Education. Probably nobody will even listen to this, but I'll drop my truth regardless. The term Greek philosophy, to begin with, is a misnomer, for there is no such philosophy in existence. Ancient Egyptians had developed a very complex religious system, and they called it the Mysteries. It was the first system of salvation. He regarded the human body as a prison house of the soul, which could be liberated from its bodily impediments through disciplines of the arts and sciences, and advance from the level of a mortal to that of a god. This was the notion of the summum bonum, or greatest good, to which all men must aspire, and it became the basis of all ethical concepts. The Egyptian mystery system was a secret order, and membership was gained by initiation and a pledge to secrecy. The teaching was graded and delivered orally to the neophyte, and under these circumstances of secrecy, the Egyptians developed the secret systems of writing and teaching, forbidding their initiates from writing what they had learned. After nearly 5,000 years of prohibition against the Greeks, they were permitted to enter Egypt for the purpose of their education, first through the Persian invasion, and secondly through the invasion of Alexander the Great. From 6th century BC, therefore, to the death of Aristotle, 322 BC, the Greeks made the best of their chance to learn all they could about Egyptian culture. Most students received instructions directly from Egyptian priests. But after the invasion by Alexander the Great, the royal temples and libraries were plundered and pillaged, and Aristotle's school converted the library at Alexandria into a research center. There is no wonder then that the production of the unusually large number of books ascribed to Aristotle has proved a physical impossibility for any single man within a lifetime. History makes it clear that the surrounding neighbors of Egypt had all become familiar with the teachings of Egyptian mysteries many centuries before the Athenians, who, in 399 BC, sentenced Socrates to death, according to Zella's History of Philosophy, page 112, 127, and 170 to 172. Subsequently, this caused Plato and Aristotle to flee for their lives from Athens, because philosophy was something foreign and unknown to them. For this same reason, we would expect either the Ionians or the Italians to exert their prior claim to philosophy, since it made contact with them long before it did with the Athenians, who were always its greatest enemies, until Alexander's conquest of Egypt, which provided for Aristotle free access to the library of Alexandria. The Ionians and Italians made no attempt to claim the authorship of philosophy, because they were well aware that the Egyptians were the true authors. On the other hand, after the death of Aristotle, his Athenian pupils, without the authority of the state, undertook to compile a history of philosophy, recognized at the time as Sophia, or Wisdom of the Egyptians, which had become current and traditional in the ancient world. Which compilation, because it was produced by pupils who had belonged to Aristotle's school, later history had erroneously called Greek philosophy, in spite of the fact that the Greeks were the greatest enemies and persecutors, and had persistently treated it as a foreign invention and innovation. For this reason, the so-called Greek philosophy is stolen Egyptian philosophy, which first spread to Ionia, then to Italy, then to Athens. And it must be remembered that at this remote period of Greek history, Thales to Aristotle, 640 BC to 322 BC, the Ionians were not Greek citizens, they were Egyptian subjects, then later became Persian subjects, according to George G. M. James, PhD. Now that's the Greeks. As far as the Romans go, there is strong evidence to suggest Etruscans were dark-skinned people who were indigenous to parts of Europe. Not only did the Etruscan settlement predate ancient Roman and Greek civilization, it greatly influenced the culture of Rome. The contributions of black cultures on the Roman Empire have sadly been whitewashed, erased, omitted, or ignored by Eurocentric historians. The study of the Etruscan DNA showed that this group of people were indigenous to the region, and their DNA sequencing links them to other Neolithic groups of Central Europe dating back as far as 7,600 years ago. Mythology tells us that Rome was founded by the twins Romulus and Remus, orphans who spent their childhood suckling a wolf like two feral children. But evidence suggests that the city was constructed by the Etruscans. For example, structures that predate Rome, which appear to be the building practices of the Etruscans, such as building their homes on the side of cliffs, as Rome was built on a series of hills, beginning with Palatine Hill. The ancient Romans were dark-skinned people long before the influx of white-skinned Caucasians. Now, my logical question concerning Remus and Romulus is, how can two feral children learn how to build a city, much less anything, from a wild wolf? Let you answer that yourself. Obviously the wolf taught them how to build a city, right? Yeah, okay. Now, the process of colonization begins with infiltration, subjugation, and preventing the colonized from speaking their original tongue, forbidding and making illegal their spiritual practices, enforcing your own religion, prevent them from learning anything at all or anything that would disrupt the status quo. This has been done by every colonizer. It has been done by Europe, it has been done by Japan, it has been done by America, it has been done by Arabian countries, as well as the Zionist Jews that exist in Europe and America. All of these people breaking the laws against the universal creator by not only hating and colonizing the black man and woman and committing genocide, knowing full well that all of you came from the black man and woman, but you continue to practice your destructive behavior to the earth. And the only time you'll ever listen is when somebody like Steve Irwin stands up and dies for it. Now, all textbooks in schools is structured in such a way as to place Europeans above all races, black people in particular, since Europeans are said to have made all the contributions to civilization and modern progress in these textbooks. This includes, but not limited to, mathematics, physics, chemistry, geography, philosophy, history, management, food preparation, etc. In all these subjects, some European is said to be the father or creator of said subject. Now, I don't know about anybody else, but in high school this made learning hard for me because I was never really interested. Now, these same textbooks, particularly the history textbooks in schools, do their best to justify slavery by claiming that benefited from slavery, or they were happy slaves during slavery, or these white people were good slave masters. You know? Essentially, Europeans have the bad habit of making up theories, and I do say theories, that have no grounds in reality, state them as facts just to suit their interests, and they will all agree on the lie if it suits them. One such example, or a few such examples. One is evolution. Second is the so-called laws of thermodynamics, which Nikola Tesla already disproved. Another is white people telling black people that they have no history, or saying that black spirituality was devil worship, while doing your best to find out everything you can about black spirituality so you can write it down and make a profit. White so-called doctors telling black people in Africa you can cure AIDS by having sex with a virgin. Yeah, when they know no better, you tell them this nonsense, and then they go around spreading AIDS. Now, the result of this is white people living in a delusion with high cognitive dissonance, and black people living in the illusion of inferiority, following the same destructive behaviors of the European because of the system that we now exist in. So, my question is, how can white people be the first to do everything if they are not the first people on Earth? And I make this statement because your very own European science has proven that all races originate from Ethiopia, Africa, or Kemet, whichever one you'd like to refer to it as, with the mitochondrial DNA traced back to an African Eve. This evidence alone should have ended any racial arguments about who did what first, but the lies still somehow persist. Yeah. The funny thing is, new facts come out from science, and little to no changes are made to textbooks to, verify that these facts have came out. Because textbooks continue to omit facts and useless details, as they say. I'll get to that a little later. Now, I don't know about you, but we were taught in geography the theory of the Earth has a molten core, mantle, magma, the plate tectonics, and we were taught this as a matter of fact. It's just how it is. It's plain fact, right? Now, I always had the question, how the hell does anybody know there's a core there if nobody has ever been there? And nobody could ever give me a reasonable answer. They said some things about scanning and picking up some type of data from the scan, but that didn't make any sense to me, therefore I still question it. Anyways, no teacher could give me a reasonable answer, and so I let it pass. I just never really believed in the theory and just left it as a theory. Similarly, when I was in psychology classes, I had to ask, why are we listening to Freud when he promoted cocaine as a wonder drug? The response I got was, get your degree first and then you can argue that point. By then you're programmed to see mental disorders in everybody. But the point I'm making is, if anybody was to take cocaine nowadays and then ramble on about, I have a new psychosexual theory in psychology, everybody would call bullshit. And that's the fact. So, I'll go on to say right now, psychology is a pseudoscience people pay way too much money for. Full stop. No, all of a sudden science says they discover more fresh water inside than on the surface of the earth, and this is fresh water we're talking about here. So then my question becomes, where is all of the magma that should be boiling all of this water? No, all of a sudden scientists say our atmosphere stretches beyond the moon. So then my question becomes, okay, so no one went to space to get to the moon. And if they went to the moon, why is NASA acting like they are outside of the atmosphere when their operating distance is between the moon and Earth, which scientists now say our atmosphere stretches to and beyond a bit? Once again, can't get any satisfying answers. Now, allowing one lie to flourish will result in a plethora, and this is essentially what has happened. And shifting between the lies and the truth becomes quite exhausting. But, as Delbert Blair states, there is no truth until you decide what truth is. So, another point I'd like to make by asking a few questions is that of savagery and barbarity. Who is more savage? Question 1. The indigenous black man living in harmony with the land and his spirituality, or the European seeking control and state dominion using Christianity to justify rape, commit genocide, and theft. Number 2. The indigenous black man living in harmony with the water and the land, or the European damming the water, altering the natural flows, controlling the water, polluting the water, and charging you for the water. Number 3. The indigenous black man living in harmony with the beasts on the land, or the European that seeks to destroy the local food sources in order to control food sources. Number 4. The black man living in harmony with the trees on the land, or the European that seeks to destroy the trees en masse for timber. 5. The indigenous black man standing up to fight for his freedom, or the European fighting to keep the indigenous man in a state of servitude. Which is truly the savage? Yet, for some reason, the pot calls the kettle black. Europeans to me seem to be more barbaric and savage in natural behavior, while projecting that said savagery and barbarity onto black people. If you study the period of the Dark Ages, you'll begin to see Europeans were quite savage and barbaric to themselves, simply for having even different beliefs. The fact that it is so easy for them to turn on one another in Europe made it way much easier for them to turn on anyone else that did not look like them, in or outside of Europe. The literature concerning that dark period of European history makes it seem as if the entire world was in the Dark Age with them. That would be untrue. The people in Africa, Asia, and America was doing quite fine while Europe was in their Dark Age. It was the so-called Moors who crossed into Europe in 711 AD that took Europe out of its Dark Age and into Renaissance. It was shortly after the Renaissance that the whitewashing of history began with the expulsion of the Moors. To this day, most European scholars still try to deny this fact, since the truth was, and still is, inconvenient to them. The fact of the matter is Spain still holds a festival of the running of the bulls, which is symbolic of chasing the Moors out of Europe, in case anybody didn't know this already. Now, Europe also has a very bad habit of celebrating the most despicable people, because they have accomplished so much for the Europeans, yeah? Christopher Columbus, Cologne, still celebrated by Europeans, even though he is known to be a pedophile and a genocidal murderer. Other evil Europeans placed on a pedestal includes, but not limited to, Winston Churchill, Cecil Rhodes, George Grey, Captain Cook, Henry Morgan, Alexander the Great, etc. Name your favorite genocidal murderer here. Now, back to the colonization of education. After the Renaissance, Europeans controlled the knowledge as best as they could for themselves. They, in order to justify their colonization of the world, had to see themselves as somehow superior to everybody else. Therefore, they used Christianity as a way to elevate themselves above everybody else. Now, the Vatican has a lot to do with this. There's a papal bull that was executed that not only encouraged but sanctioned the colonization and the genocide of black people worldwide. Moving a bit further in history, after the end of slavery, during the so-called Progressive Era, between 1880 and 1925, this is said to be a... what would I say? Progressive era where things were really good back in the day or so. The fact of the matter is, this was a time period when the KKK was very active. Germany was active in Namibia, committing genocide in the early 1900s. Bombing of black cities, killing of black people in America. First bomb to drop in America was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where he used dynamite to bomb down Black Wall Street, the Elaine Massacre. A number of other atrocities that took place during that time. So much so that there's a book written on it, and the book is called Without Sanctuary. Most people will not be able to read this book, but this book paints the horrid history of the lynchings throughout this time period. And the picnics that Europeans were having during killing, because it was quite a stage show. It was entertainment for the mob to come down and watch a nigger hang. Yeah, and you do very despicable things. But I suppose that's another video, because the mutilations that took place were very severe and quite graphic. It shows the lack of humanity that the Europeans had at that point in time. Without Sanctuary. Just thinking about it, I can remember pictures of a black woman who was pregnant and her baby being ripped from her while being hung. That one sticks with me. Most Europeans may probably see this book and feel nothing, but other people with a sense of empathy will understand. Now back to the education. The thorough colonization of education began during this period of 1880 to 1925, when John D. Rockefeller formed the General Educational Board. And with it, they pretty much believed the best education for poor was vocational, so they'd be able to maintain occupations for their life and pretty much provide labor for those in power and providing the jobs, the industrialists at the time. This precedent was set by Rockefeller and continued after its founding in 1903. It rescued schools from desperate circumstances, but advocated vocational offerings for students who would not attend college. Problem is not with opening doors to poor children, but with closing the doors to any other area a student might choose to pursue. Apparently Rockefeller believed that students' destiny was known and that is where their future lay, because it's already set in stone according to him. One of the changes on the General Educational Board showed vocational education was both the goal and the result, and this is proven in the documents I have provided here. They were greatly concerned with the so-called good of society, which would benefit from trained farmers and workers to serve it, essentially meaning black people to work the farms for the white people, without actually saying it. So, the extraordinary change that took place with Rockefeller and the General Educational Board is the redefinition of school from an institution for those who did not have work to an institution for all children. So at first, school was for people who did not have work. And the point of whether or not this is a good or bad thing is debatable, because you did have child labor taking place, so some would argue it's better to have children in school, and some would argue not. Some would argue that the previous system was more effective in education, but I digress. That would probably be another video in itself. So, continuing the colonization of education. Essentially, Rockefeller advocated for immigrants and poor people vocational training and domestic training. And he sponsored a lot of conferences to this effect. One in 1914, one in 1917. Their suggestions usually included home building courses, farm life, rural economy, background letters. Conferences also provide insight regarding the control that the General Educational Board had over their programs and hired agents. Booker T. Washington framed the particular advantage of industrial education over so-called book learning in terms of positive impact on the lives of white people. As he described in a 1903 article in The Atlantic, black professionals such as lawyers, doctors, and ministers primarily served the black communities, but black people trained in trades and business pursuits could serve both black and white communities. There was a general appreciation of the fact that industrial education of the black people had direct, vital, and practical bearing upon the life of each white family in the South, while there was no such appreciation of the results of mere literary training. The minute it was seen that through industrial education, the black youth was not only studying chemistry but how to apply the knowledge to enrich the soil, or cooking, or to dairying, and that student was being taught not only geometry and physics, but their application to blacksmithing, brickmaking, farming, and whatnot. Then there began to appear for the first time a common bond between the two races of cooperation between the North and the South. W.B. Du Bois on the other hand, felt that higher education should not be focused on teaching the skills necessary to earn a living, but should shape students into people by teaching them how to think. Teach the workers to work and the thinkers to think. And the final product of our training must be neither a psychologist nor a brick mason, but a man. And to make men, he must have ideals broad, pure, and inspiring ends of living, not sordid money-getting. Now, even though the two had different philosophies, they both supported each other's vision. In 1902, Washington wrote about the goal of education in a way that's similar to Du Bois, that education makes human beings the end of all education, whether head or hand or heart, is to make an individual good, to make him useful, powerful, and give him goodness, usefulness, and power, in order that he may exert a helpful influence upon his fellows. Both Washington and Du Bois formulated educational methodologies within systems that were not set up to benefit their target groups of students, which would be black people, in the racially segregated Jim Crow United States. Each educator found ways to maneuver within the white supremacy system, to carve out a space where their methodology might be successful without threatening the white supremacy system. Washington articulated his position in a speech he gave in Atlanta in 1906. He knew that black people attaining education, wealth, and civil rights were seen by many white people as a threat to their own wealth and rights. Booker T sought to allay those fears by assuring his audience that black people had no ambition to mingle with the white race, to dominate the white man in political matters. Washington's separatist vision was at odds with W.E.B. Du Bois, who wanted integration, and was less challenging to white people who were wary of losing their own status in awarding social gains to people of color. Now, W.E.B. Du Bois, mostly known for the formation of the NAACP, but the head of the NAACP, as you see in this picture here, is a Jew who controls the money and therefore controls the organization for quite some time. I believe Khalid Mohammed had the details on that one. Now then, Rockefeller continued his colonization of the education with the formation of the Oriental Institute in 1909. This played a pivotal role in the formation of Egyptology and the broader field of so-called Oriental studies. It was founded at the University of Chicago with James Henry Breasted, an American archaeologist and historian. Funding came from John D. Rockefeller Jr., and his support was instrumental in establishing and sustaining the Institute's early work. The mission: the Institute was established to promote the study of ancient civilizations of Near East, including Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Persia. Now, Egypt is East Africa. I'm not sure how it became Near East. I'm not sure how the Middle East became the Middle East. But Europeans like to make up a lot of words. Like I said, they like to make up a lot of theories that have no basis in fact. They'll agree to the lie and they'll run with it as long as it suits their agenda. Everybody can agree to the lie and live in a delusion. I digress. Fieldwork and research. It focused on conducting archaeological excavations, deciphering ancient texts, and preserving artifacts. It aimed to advance the understanding of ancient cultures through rigorous scholarly research. As far as Egyptology goes, this refers to the study of ancient Egypt, became known as Egyptology. It began with the French expedition led by Napoleon in 1798 to 1801, which included scientists and scholars. This led to the publication of the Description de l'Égypte, sparking European interest in ancient Egypt. Throughout the 19th century, Egyptology became a more formalized discipline, with significant contributions from scholars like Jean-François Champollion, who deciphered the Rosetta Stone in 1822. Now, the funding and sponsorship of said archaeological expeditions often came from wealthy individuals and institutions. Notably, the Rockefeller family has had a significant impact on archaeological and cultural preservation activities worldwide. The Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago, founded in 1919 with the funding from John D. Rockefeller, became a prominent center for the study of ancient Near Eastern civilizations. The Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago, founded in 1919 with the funding from John D. Rockefeller Jr., became the prominent center for the study of Near Eastern civilizations, which somehow included Egypt. Now, the term whitewashing refers to the fact that historical interpretations have been manipulated to downplay the contributions of any black civilizations and to present ancient Egypt in a light that aligns more closely with Western or European-centric perspectives. The reason why this is an issue is because the early Egyptologists were clearly influenced by the racial attitudes of their time, and they depicted ancient Egyptians in ways that minimized, removed, or hid their African heritage. Authors you can refer to that will confirm that this is fact: Martin Bernal, Gerald Massey, George G.M. James, Ivan van Sertima, Dr. Ivan van Sertima, to name a few. And he did the book They Came Before Columbus. Now, whitewashing stems from the broader context of colonialism itself and the control of the archaeological narratives by Western powers during the 19th century till now. And the archaeological narratives is being controlled by the Rockefeller Institution. Greece was the first to be whitewashed when Europeans changed and remade statues and changed the black gods into their own image. They then claimed it as the birthplace of philosophy, which is simply rubbish. All this in order to justify white supremacy when they went around the world colonizing the black man. Rockefeller played a significant role in the funding of these projects, including those in Egypt. But apparently the idea of a specific mandate aimed at whitewashing Egyptian history is not very well documented, even though it has taken place. The establishment of institutions like the Oriental Institute reflects the broader trend of Western involvement in the study of ancient civilizations, which can be critiqued for its colonial underpinnings and blatant biases, especially since Egypt is in Africa and not in the Orient. According to Dr. Vanessa Davies, The divide between white Egyptology and African studies perpetuates the separation of Egypt from the rest of Africa. It privileges the people in Egyptology programs as qualified to speak about Egypt, and, from the perspective of Egyptology, confers the opposite on the people in African studies. That divide separated Dubois, Hansberry, and other scholars from white Egyptology. We must not maintain that racist, divisive system. Now, there was an Egyptian craze that took place when, or should I say, after Napoleon visited or passed by Egypt, I should say, with his scholars. There was a craze for Egypt. It was all the craze. So much so that because of the stories that they heard from the priests, knowledge of some of our rituals, they took certain things out of hand. Now, I'm going to go into a bit of European cannibalism that Europeans like to deny. They don't like to admit that this took place, but this did indeed happen. This was the practice of consuming mummified remains, known as mummy medicine. It is a curious and somewhat macabre aspect of European history, this practice, which peaked between the 16th and 18th centuries, based on the belief that the powdered mummy parts had medicinal properties. So, this essentially states that Egypt was known about before Napoleon invaded. There is speculation as to whether or not he was the one to deface the noses, but chances are Arabian colonists were defacing the structures long before the Europeans were, because they have no respect for the monuments of Egypt, and the only reason they preserve it is for the foreign exchange nowadays, not for any respect of the spirituality, because they believe in Islam, even though they received Islam from Egypt. But I digress once again, as all religions came out of Egypt. So, back to the mummy medicine. The use of human remains for medical purposes dates back to ancient times. However, the specific use of Egyptian mummies in Europe began in the medieval period. The use of human remains for medical purposes dates back to ancient times. I must admit that Africans did practice a form of cannibalism, but there was much ritual attached to it before it was even done, and even after. If not attached to a ritual, it should not be consumed in the first place. It was a practice that was secret, and it was a practice that was very taboo to the rest of Africa, because it was something done in order to attain more spiritual knowledge and to test the initiate of his mental fortitude and seriousness of learning the knowledge. Europeans, on the other hand, they chose to use Egyptian mummies for mumia powder. European physicians, apothecaries, believed that consuming this mummy powder could cure a variety of ailments, including headaches, stomach problems, and bruising. This belief was rooted in the idea that the preservation of mummies, seen as having magical or medicinal properties, would transfer to those who consume them. Close, but not quite. Medicinal practices. Mummia, the substance was called, ground into a fine powder, ingested or applied as a poultice. It was considered a panacea, a cure-all, thought to possess the preserved vital energies of the ancient Egyptians. Initially, real mummies were imported to Europe for use in this practice. The trade was fueled by the high demand for mummia and facilitated by the plundering of Egyptian tombs. The demand for mummia was so phenomenal that Egypt's once plentiful reserves of ancient corpses were being depleted. The temptation was, therefore, great for traders to offer mummies of a much more recent vintage. Yes. Now we're getting into wine talk, yeah? Let's have an earlier vintage. It'll be delicious. As early as 1564, the French physician Guy de la Fontaine, who worked for the King of Navarre, examined around 40 mummies held by a Jewish dealer unnamed in Alexandria. La Fontaine had said something about the Jews, but I'll leave that alone for now. La Fontaine found many had been manufactured from recently deceased individuals, such as executed criminals and slaves, held by a Jewish dealer. The corpses had been coated and filled with bitumen, then exposed to the sun to create mummified tissue. Over time, the scarcity of genuine mummies led to the creation of fake mummies, often using the remains of executed criminals or recently deceased individuals, treated to resemble Egyptian mummies. So, I assume they applied formaldehyde and coated them in rags and all that jazz. But Europeans weren't just content with making ointments from millennia-old mummies or swallowing their powdered remnants in wine. Their art would also seek mummia. Painters prized a pigment made from the substance called mummy brown, a rich brown hue which fell between the shades of burnt and raw umber. Mummy brown was said to be good for glazes, good for shadows, great for shading, and excellent for flesh tones. Mummy brown was particularly popular among the pre-Raphaelites and was available in London art shops as late as the 1960s. Up to the 1960s. The so-called decline of the practice by the 18th century, even though shops were still selling mummy brown in the 1960s. They said that advances in medical science and changing attitudes towards health and medicine began to diminish the popularity of mummy medicine. The practice was largely abandoned in the 19th century. It became seen as ineffective and unsanitary, which it was. The archaeological ethics started to evolve. But by then, I would have to say most of the damage had already been done, because Europe essentially consumed the dead remains of the Egyptian mummies. He consumed it in paint and medicine. He used the ancestors in paint to paint pictures. The so-called archaeological ethic started to evolve after the damage was already done and great depletion of the Egyptian mummies have taken place. All of a sudden they're considering the impacts on archaeology, because all of this eating and the trade in the mummies obviously impacted the archaeological sites in Egypt. So Rockefeller needed to rush and preserve it somehow, yeah? Anyway, many mummies were lost or destroyed as a result of this, thus complicating the so-called modern efforts to study ancient Egyptian culture and history, thereby making it much easier for them to make up a story and input whoever they want into that story with whatever color they like. Which is what they essentially did. This practice raises ethical issues, particularly concerning the desecration and commercialization of the human remains of black people. I'll say that again. The desecration and the commercialization of black human remains. This reflected a broader colonial attitude that viewed artifacts and remains of black cultures as a commodity, which is still how it is viewed to this day, because all of the artifacts that were stolen from Africa by the missionaries, and they had insidious ways of doing this. They would erect hospitals, and when the African came in to seek treatment, he would demand of the African to bequeath all of his spiritual items, totems, anything to do with his spirituality. Give up all his precious objects, and then he'll be treated. That is the ultimatum that the missionaries gave Africans when they erected their hospitals in Africa. So when people tell me how good Christianity is, how good Jesus Christ is, I'll tell them to jump off a cliff, because Jesus Christ and Christianity was used to enslave my people and justify genocide around the world, and I want no part of it. I worship the one true God of this universe and realm, Unkulunkulu, and nobody else. No Naga, nothing else. The supreme creator of the universe. So, to conclude in this cannibalism of black Egyptian mummies, this consumption of Egyptian mummified remains in Europe is a striking example of historical medical malpractice. It would be considered highly unethical today, and underscores the exploitative nature of the early interactions between Europe and every other culture, particularly in the context of colonialism and trade in antiquities. This practice has left a lasting impact on both historical understanding of ancient Egypt and the ethical standards of modern archaeology. The colonization of education continues to this day. Lauryn Hill calls it the miseducation. I find it highly disrespectful that Europeans call black people savages when they do this type of behavior and consume people on a commercial level for medicine and paint, not even understanding the destruction of history that taking place. So because you destroyed the history, or a lot of the history, you basically have to fabricate it for yourself now. I remember watching a documentary on the ancient wall of Zimbabwe and the first white man to discover it. And he was saying this could not possibly be built by the Africans. It had to have been an ancient white race of some sort. Yes, had to have been. Fact of the matter is, everywhere Europeans have ever gone, they found black people. They found a black history, and they erased it to the best of their ability. I find it very hypocritical that you push Christianity on my people after you demanded to know the spiritual knowledge of my people. You prevent us from knowing our spirituality and make it illegal for us to know our spirituality after stealing our spirituality and using our spirituality for yourself while you claim to be Christian or Jewish or Islam. Fact of the matter is, Islam and Christianity are both used for political purposes to enslave people, and I'm not with either one of them. Jews use the teachings of Moses the Kabbalion in order to maintain powerful positions as a minority, and they essentially want to be superior to the Europeans who think they're superior to black people, which to me in itself is retarded, but yeah. Jews, what can I say? They like to be in control of things. There's evidence that their involvement in the slave trade was very heavy, which they like to deny. They benefited the most from slavery. I want to say black people benefited from slavery? No. Jewish people benefited from slavery. White people was a close second. The regular white people. Or should I say every other white people other than Jews who they consider to be goyim, yeah? So, at the end of education, you pretty much come out, if you don't know any better, thinking just like how a white man thinks, looking to exploit the world and exploit the people for your personal financial gain, regardless of what you have to do it, regardless of what is destroyed in order for you to do it. If you follow the tenets of Western philosophy 100%, that is. You'll have very little empathy doing these things in order to make it. Caribbean colonial textbooks tried to paint Europeans as the ones who were against slavery because Bartholomew de las Casas witnessed the atrocities of Columbus and wrote them down in order to enlighten the rest of the European nation. Because apparently there was still a spark of soul left within Bartholomew de las Casas, that he actually felt bad for what was taking place. Now, contrary to popular belief, the only reason why Europeans let off or agreed to stop slavery is because it was too costly for them, because they couldn't maintain such a system of direct control, because there would be rebellion. The first of it to happen, or the most successful of it to happen, was in Haiti with the Haitian Revolution, started by a man called Dutty Bookman, who was in Jamaica before. He caused so much trouble that they took him from Haiti and took him from Jamaica and put him in Haiti. And then he started the revolution there. The one God that he refers to is the same Nkulunkulu.
The God who created the earth, who created the sun that gives us light, the God who holds up the oceans, who make the thunder roar, our God, who has ears to hear, you who are hidden in the clouds, who watch us from where you are. You see all that the white has made us suffer. The white man's God asked him to commit crimes, but the God within us wants to do good. Our God, who is so good, so just, he ordered us to avenge our wrong. It is he who will direct our arms and bring us the victory. It is he who will assist us. We all should throw away the image of the white man's God, who is so pitiless. Listen to the voice for liberty that sings in all our hearts.